Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case. Imagine that today we're visiting a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best films across all genres. But instead of a movie set, we find ourselves in Wilber, Nebraska. And our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska, located in the Great Plains, sits in Tornado Alley. In the spring and summer, severe thunderstorms and tornadoes are common. Nebraska is one of the few tri-state areas that is landlocked, meaning that to reach the ocean, you would have to pass through 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on dark country roads, but a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote, dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of his car. As he walked around, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage. But this bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to his car, grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it, and something had leaked out. Something pale was flickering from the holes. As he moved closer, the man froze. What he saw was a human hand sticking out of the bag. A call to emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the highway and inspected the area. They confirmed that the bag contained human remains. The package was sent for examination, and the searchers combed the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The victim was 24-year-old Sydney Loofe. Sydney Irene Loofe was born on August 21, 1993. In Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents, George and Susie Loofe. Sydney's family moved to Nellie in 2000 when she was in 2nd grade. Her mother, Susie, was a special education teacher, and her father, George, was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child and had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father often took her to do. During her school years, Sydney played basketball and golf, making good progress, but she developed scoliosis, a curvature of the spine, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities, ending her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofes were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, they stayed in touch almost every day, often meeting for dinner. Even though Sydney lived on her own, she frequently returned home to visit her parents. But recently, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie, her mother, was worried and recommended a new doctor, who prescribed her different medications. In phone conversations, Sydney told her mom that she was feeling better, sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make changes in her life and was searching for a new job. Working at a store was not her dream, and she felt uncertain about what career path to follow. These worries led to her depressive state. In November 2017, her mental health worsened, and she began taking antidepressants. She sometimes smoked pot to relax. Her family and friends were supportive, but Sydney was also seeking love and companionship. Being young and modern, she was interested in dating women, and she sometimes used social media to meet new people. To find a potential partner, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people to connect, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, Sydney connected with a girl named Aubrey on Tinder. They hit it off and began exchanging messages. They found that they had a lot in common, such as a love for hiking, gambling, and good food. After chatting for a while, they decided to meet on November 14th. Sydney headed over to Audrey's house in Wilber for their first date. The meeting went so well that Sydney was overjoyed. They liked each other and agreed to meet again the next day, on November 15th. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and then returned home to get ready for her date. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before heading out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date afterward." She received a message from Aubrey to meet her, and Sydney left. The next day, Sydney didn't show up for work. Even though she had been in good spirits lately because of her new connection with Aubrey, her family grew concerned when co-workers reported that she hadn't come to work, which was completely out of character for her. Susie, her mother, spoke of Sydney's anxiety and her deep depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had recently confided in her family about her deteriorating mental health, and they had advised her to visit a doctor again to review her medications. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When her parents went to her apartment, they were shocked to discover that Sydney had left her beloved cat, Mimsy, without food or water, which was entirely out of character for such a caring pet owner. Sydney loved her cat deeply and never left her alone for long. Her parents reported her missing to the police. The apartment was locked, and when the police conducted a welfare check, they found nothing out of the ordinary. But her family insisted something was terribly wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16th, 2017, Sydney, a 5 blonde, was officially reported missing after failing to show up for work at the Menards store on 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that made her walk with a distinct gait. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. Her parents shared with the police that Sydney had told a friend on Snapchat that she had gone on a date with a woman she had met online and that they had planned to meet again the next day. Sydney's car, which she had left in Northeast Lincoln, was found. The police conducted interviews and were searching for leads. Her family began distributing flyers, fearing she had been abducted. Sydney's last known phone activity showed that her cell phone had communicated with a tower in the Wilber neighborhood, the same area where Aubrey lived. But Sydney's phone had been turned off the night she disappeared, and there had been no activity in her bank accounts. The search for Sydney intensified, with highway billboards displaying her picture and a massive manhunt launched. Susie, Sydney's mother, insisted that something had gone wrong after her daughter's date. She shared a screenshot of Sydney's Snapchat post, which showed her picture with the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she had gone on a date with a woman she had met on Tinder named Aubrey. The police, reviewing phone records and surveillance footage from the store where Sydney worked, quickly identified the last person they needed to speak with Aubrey. The problem was they had no idea who she really was, as no one knew her full name. That's when Sydney's friend, Brooklyn, decided to take matters into her own hands. She downloaded Tinder and started searching for Aubrey herself. After exchanging messages, Brooklyn discovered that Aubrey was actually 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. Bailey shared an apartment with her 52-year-old partner, Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell grew up in Leon, Iowa, in a normal family. She was friendly and did well in school, excelling in basketball and running. However, after her father's death, Bailey's life took a dark turn. She got involved with bad company, alcohol, and drugs. On a dating website, she met Aubrey, a man with a troubling past filled with fraud, theft, and various criminal activities. Aubrey Trail portrayed himself as the leader of a cult, calling himself a vampire and promising his followers power through dark rituals. He created a group of women, paying them $200 a week to follow his strange rules. Bailey, under his influence, became involved in this twisted world. By the time Sydney went missing, Aubrey and Bailey were on the run, facing multiple charges including fraud. On November 19, 2017, police obtained a warrant to search Bailey and Aubrey's home. Inside, they found that parts of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, confirmed by neighbors who had noticed a strong smell of chlorine. A few days later, police tracked Bailey and Aubrey to a hotel in Branson, Missouri, where they were taken into custody. Weeks after Sydney was reported missing, investigators uncovered her dismembered remains. Sydney had been cut into 14 pieces, with 13 of her body parts found in black plastic bags scattered across rural areas of Clay County. Horrifyingly, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. The discovery sent shockwaves through Nebraska. 16 separate crime scenes were identified, containing Sydney's remains and personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, and phone case were found along the highway, matching the routes taken by the suspects. Forensics revealed abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, and injuries that indicated she had fought for her life. The Loofe family held a private funeral on December 11, 2017, at the Lutheran church where Sydney had attended. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey, meanwhile, also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy but admitted guilt in the improper disposal of human remains. His version of events, however, constantly changed with each deposition. When Aubrey Trail first spoke with the police after his arrest, he spun an elaborate story about the cult he and Bailey were allegedly involved in. He claimed they practiced witchcraft and portrayed himself as a vampire who could fly. He also alleged that his witches needed to kill another woman in order to gain supernatural powers. At one of his initial court hearings, Aubrey admitted that he had killed Sydney Loofe but insisted it was an accident. He claimed that he had paid Sydney $5,000 to fulfill one of his intimate faux-pas. However, during the act, he said he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted to dismembering her body, claiming it was part of a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He explained that draining her blood was necessary to release her soul, and dismembering the body would allow her to reincarnate faster. Despite these bizarre claims, this version of events was later proven false by evidence. Surveillance footage dated November 14, 2017, showed Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lived. The next day, November 15th, they were seen visiting a home improvement store where they bought a gruesome array of tools, including a hacksaw chlorine bleach, a folding saw, and the bags used to dispose of Sydney's remains. Footage from the Menards store where Sydney worked also captured her crossing paths with Aubrey during business hours on November 15th. Sydney had no idea who he was at the time, nor could she have imagined the cruel fate awaiting her. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing for Sydney Loofe's murder and improper burial was held. Separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, but the charges against them were essentially the same. Due to the extensive media coverage and public outcry in Wilber, the trials were moved to Lexington to ensure a fair trial. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Sydney's murder was premeditated and part of a carefully planned attack. They described how Bailey and Aubrey had lured Sydney to their apartment under false pretenses. Bailey, in particular, had used Tinder to meet Sydney, pretending to be a normal, friendly woman, when in fact she and Aubrey had far more sinister intentions. The jury heard testimony from 3 other women who had been in relationships with both Bailey and Aubrey at different times. These women had also been lured into intimate encounters through Tinder, and all of them testified about Bailey's involvement in these acts. One woman even traveled with the couple after meeting them, receiving a weekly allowance of $200 from Aubrey to follow his rules. She testified that Aubrey had invited her to join his cult, where he called his followers witches and insisted they had to kill someone to gain their powers. Bailey, known as the Witch Queen within the group, was also deeply involved in the cult's macabre discussions of torture and murder. One woman testified that Bailey enjoyed talking in great detail about torture and even expressed a desire to dismember bodies. She spoke of how Bailey and Aubrey were both equally involved in these conversations, further implicating Bailey as a willing participant in their twisted world. Despite living in the modern world, Aubrey and Bailey seemed to hold disturbingly archaic beliefs in the supernatural, attempting to justify their horrific actions through a mix of cult-like rituals and exorcism fantasies. Prosecutors, however, focused on reconstructing the events of the tragic night of November 15, 2017. Sydney, thinking she was meeting Bailey for a date, had no idea she was being lured into a trap. After being picked up by Bailey, Sydney was driven to the apartment where Aubrey and Bailey lived. Once inside, the couple attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterward, they meticulously cleaned the apartment and disposed of Sydney's body in a series of rural locations. During the trial, landlord Jennifer Call testified that when she arrived at the apartment on November 16th, she was immediately struck by the strong smell of chlorine. The odor only intensified as she entered the building, suggesting the place had been thoroughly cleaned to cover up the crime. The medical examiner's testimony confirmed what Sydney's family had feared: her death was ruled a homicide, caused by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of her death, a grim reminder of the struggle she had faced in her final days. The court also learned that several of Sydney's organs, including her heart, were missing, though the reason for their removal remained unclear. Prosecutors demanded the death penalty for both Bailey and Aubrey. They argued that the crime was premeditated, brutal, and deserving of the most severe punishment. The court also heard from experts who testified about Bailey's involvement, proving she had actively participated in both Sydney's murder and the disposal of her remains. In the middle of the trial, Aubrey caused a shocking scene. At one point, while shouting that Bailey had nothing to do with Sydney's death, he pulled out a razor blade and slashed his own throat 3 times in front of him. Aubrey survived the suicide attempt and was taken into custody, missing several weeks of the trial as he recovered. When Aubrey returned to court, he decided to testify in his own defense. Typically, defense attorneys advise against this, as defendants can often incriminate themselves further on cross-examination. But in Aubrey's case, his legal team was unable to stop him. When he took the stand, Aubrey admitted that he had lied to both the police and his legal team in his previous statements. He gave yet another version of the events, claiming that Sydney's death had been an accident. Aubrey claimed that he had met Sydney earlier in 2017 and had paid her to participate in illegal activities because she needed money. He said they had lost contact but reconnected in November 2017 when Bailey reached out to her. According to Aubrey, Sydney needed money again, and that was why she agreed to meet with them on November 15th. He stated that her death occurred during a consensual intimate act, and he accidentally strangled her with the extension cord. He denied any involvement in cult rituals, blood sacrifices, or supernatural practices. He insisted that Sydney's dismemberment was purely out of panic, as he couldn't fit her body in his car. When asked why he didn't seek help or call the authorities if it had been an accident, Aubrey replied that no one would believe him, given his criminal past. Bailey, meanwhile, maintained her innocence throughout her trial. Her attorneys argued that she was a victim of Aubrey's manipulation and that she had been coerced into participating in his illegal activities. They claimed that Bailey, a vulnerable young woman at the time, had fallen under Aubrey's influence and had nothing to do with Sydney's death. Her legal team painted her as a victim, trying to distance her from Aubrey's increasingly bizarre stories. However, cell phone records and surveillance footage proved otherwise. Bailey's phone had been used near the locations where Sydney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone data that investigators were able to trace the couple's movements. Additionally, Bailey had been the one to contact Sydney on Tinder, arrange the date, and pick her up on the night of November 15th. The prosecution painted a picture of Bailey as a willing participant in the crime, deriving satisfaction from discussions of cruelty and torture. On the day of Sydney's murder, Bailey and Aubrey had been seen together at a home improvement store buying tools that were later used to dismember Sydney's body. Text messages between Bailey and Sydney showed that Bailey was at Sydney's apartment on the night of the murder, waiting to pick her up. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sydney's family, who had been seeking justice for 3 long years, finally received the closure they desperately needed. The Loofe family had mourned and longed for their Sydney, and the sentence gave them some semblance of peace. As for Aubrey Trail, it took the jury less than 3 hours to find him guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper disposal of human remains. His crime was described as cold and calculated. In the second phase of his trial, which determined whether he should face the death penalty, prosecutors made good on their promise to seek the harshest punishment. On June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. The case of Sydney Loofe shocked not only Nebraska but the entire nation. Aubrey Trail, a con man turned cult leader, had convinced his followers that he was a vampire and manipulated vulnerable women into believing in his delusions. But in the end, justice prevailed, and the monstrous actions of Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell were brought to an end. The conclusion of the Sydney Loofe case marked the end of a tragic and horrifying chapter, not only for her family but for the entire community of Nebraska. The trial had garnered national attention, leaving many people stunned by the depths of deception, manipulation, and cruelty that were revealed during the legal proceedings. Sydney, a kind and loving young woman, had unknowingly fallen victim to a pair of individuals whose twisted fantasies and bizarre beliefs led to her untimely death. For Sydney's family, the long and painful journey to justice had come to a close with Bailey Boswell's life sentence and Aubrey Trail's execution. But the pain of losing Sydney in such a brutal and senseless way remained. Her parents, George and Susie Loofe, became outspoken advocates for missing persons, working to raise awareness and offer support to other families facing similar tragedies. Though the court's verdict brought a sense of justice, the Loofe family would forever carry the weight of Sydney's loss. In the aftermath, the case left many people reflecting on the dangers of online dating and the vulnerabilities that young people, particularly women, can face when interacting with strangers on social media platforms. The fact that Sydney had met her killer on Tinder served as a chilling reminder that not everyone behind a screen is who they claim to be. The case underscored the importance of caution, even in an increasingly digital and interconnected world where online relationships have become the norm. The trial also revealed the dark underworld of cult-like behaviors and how individuals like Aubrey Trail can manipulate and control others through fear, lies, and promises of power. His so-called vampire cult may have sounded absurd to the average person, but to those who fell under his influence, it became a dangerous reality. For Bailey, her involvement was debated throughout the trial, with her defense claiming that she was a victim of Aubrey's control. But the evidence showed otherwise. Bailey had actively participated in luring Sydney to her death, making her as culpable as Aubrey in the eyes of the law. While the legal system brought closure to this tragic story, the case of Sydney Loofe will forever be a reminder of the fragility of trust, the dangers that lurk in seemingly safe spaces, and the resilience of those left behind to pick up the pieces. Sydney's story also stands as a testament to the determination and dedication of law enforcement officials like Detective Andrea Morris and her team, who worked tirelessly to bring the perpetrators to justice. Their relentless pursuit of the truth, coupled with the support of Sydney's family and friends, ensured that her killers would not evade responsibility for their actions. In the years that followed, the Loofe family continued to honor Sydney's memory. They worked to keep her story alive, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a symbol of hope, resilience, and the importance of seeking justice for all victims of crime. Her legacy served as a beacon for those who found themselves in similar situations, reminding them that even in the darkest of times, justice can prevail. As for Bailey Boswell, she will spend the rest of her life behind bars, left to reflect on her role in one of Nebraska's most infamous murders. Aubrey Trail, the self-proclaimed vampire and cult leader, met his fate by lethal injection, his crimes forever marking him as one of the most reviled criminals in recent memory. But in the end, it was not the perpetrators who remained in the public's mind, but Sydney. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of the strength and unity of her family, friends, and the community that rallied around her in her final days. The love and light she brought to those around her could never be extinguished by the actions of those who sought to harm her. Thank you for watching this true crime documentary. Please subscribe to my channel for more stories like this, as we continue to explore the real-life cases that remind us of both the darkness and the resilience of the human spirit. Stay safe, and always be vigilant.